Hey everyone, this is John Puritz. Welcome to the Man Up Already podcast. This show is dedicated to each of us being better in all areas of our lives, mentally, spiritually, physically, and relationally. We want to help you be a better you because when you man up already, the world around you is greatly impacted. Here on the podcast, we don't believe you're an accident. We believe each of us is created for purpose, and this show is dedicated to helping you discover and live out that purpose. Again, welcome to the show, and let's check out another great episode. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Man Up Already podcast, and I am super pumped to be here with you today after a considerable hiatus of one that was a period of deep spiritual, mental, and emotional healing. There's a lot of lessons that I'm going to talk about that have come out of that. But I needed that time to really deal with me, deal with what I was going through in life, find myself that had gotten a little thrown. And so adversity does that, right? It causes you to take a pause. And I recognized that I would be doing the podcast a disservice if I kept going. I needed to regroup and get some things handled. And to that effect, I would say that there are times in life when we need our support system far more than I think we realize. And those are the moments where you've got to reach out. Those are the moments that you've got to get help. And help is going to come in probably many different forms and ways that you're used to. I've had to humble myself on some certain things and get humbled and accept the help where it was coming from. And it's made a huge difference in doing those things. So if you're going through it, reach out to your support system, get some help. And I promise you that what's on the other side of that is really so worth it. The other thing is what I had experienced. And I know this, right? The same mind that created the problem is not the mind that's going to fix it. Sometimes the same mindset that got you to the experience that you're in is not the mindset that's going to get you to the next level. Like you've got to learn something beyond yourself, which is why I say you got to get help. Okay. So with that, let's invite our guest today. I'm excited to have him. He's the author of the book, Carrying the Tiger. He has an incredible story of love, loss, and healing, and what lies beyond the other side of that. So I'm excited to welcome our guest today. Please welcome Tony Stewart. Tony, it is a pleasure to have you on today.
Well, thank you very much, John. It is a pleasure to be here.
I was... when we were just talking, but I really, when I have a guest who has such an incredible story, who's been through some things, I'm always excited by what I'm personally going to learn from the conversation. So it really is an honor to have you. On the intro, I had shared that you wrote the book, Carrying the Tiger. Mm-hmm. When did that come out?
That has been out a couple of months now.
So, congrats.
Yes, thank you. We're in the early stages. It came out, technically it came out on April 29th. I'm not sure when so it's been a few weeks as we record this conversation, and it'll be a little longer by the time this streams.
Nice.
Yeah, thank you.
Nice. Well, let's talk about that and what led up to it. I know you have a really incredible story. So, let's dive in. So the book is really about your journey with your wife who passed away from cancer.
Yes. So let me just say, the book Carrying the Tiger has a 3-part subtitle, and I tried to lay it all out in the subtitle so people would know what they were in for. If you want to read the book, this is what you're going to have: living with cancer, dying with grace, finding joy while grieving.
Wow.
So that's the story I tried to tell. It starts in 2014 on the day that we heard from Lynn's doctor that these mysterious symptoms she'd been chasing down, the doctors had been looking in the wrong place. But guess what? That little knot of pain in her back that they finally did an MRI of, and I'm not blaming the doctors. Most of her symptoms were not there. Right. They did an MRI and they discovered, guess what, Lynn, said her doctor on the phone, you've got tumors in your lung and in your spine. And she had stage 4 lung cancer from the day that we first heard about it. And she was like you, very fit, very active. She was in her 60s at the time. She was older than me. I was in my 50s at the time. But we just totally did not see this coming.
And you had shared with me, because we were talking before we went live, my journey with pancreatic cancer in my family, and you're saying lung cancer, like when you find out it's what you're talking, like pancreatic, it's pretty far.
Yes, for a lot of people. I mean, the stereotype that I always had growing up was smoker, asbestos exposure, particles in your lung, coughing, emphysema-like symptoms, etc. Guess what? More than 50% of lung cancer has nothing to do with any of those things. They colloquially call it non-smokers lung cancer, and it's more than half of it. And often, like Lynn, you can have no lung-related symptoms as the tumors grow, and then in her case, eventually metastasize.
Wow.
The symptoms the doctors were chasing down for those few months before they actually looked in the right place were all gastrointestinal. She was having trouble digesting. She was getting acid reflux. She was having diarrhea, and it just was getting to be a lot, and she was losing weight. And so they were looking from the belly button down. She literally had no symptoms in her lungs related to her lungs, and then eventually the metastasis in her spine is what grew and caused pain and finally clued them to look in the right place.
I'm going to take the 3 titles of your book and maybe kind of expound on that a little bit.
Sure.
What lessons come out of that? Like, what in your book, what's the gist of, hey,
So I'm on the way to answering your question. Let me tell you that when you read the book, I don't give you lessons, and I don't give you answers, and I don't give you conclusions. I decided there are very good books that are like that are very much like looking down at it and saying, here's what happened, and here's what I think you can learn from my story. I just wanted to tell a story in which you're right with me, and you go through all the experiences that Lynn and I had, and you see the choices that we made, and you see what happened. And many of them turned out well, and some did not turn out well, and you can draw your own conclusions. But having said that, you ask a really good question. What are you gonna see if you read this book and you follow along? One thing you'll see is that Lynn and I approached her cancer differently. She was more emotional than me. She was a painter, an artist, and I had been a filmmaker years earlier, but I was doing computer stuff at the time. So I dived into Google searches and obsessively trying to research. This was my way of coping, I should say. My way of coping was to try and research and understand and plan and make a plan B. And what if this drug doesn't work? A plan C, and what's on the horizon? And as soon as Lynn started doing that, she realized that if you do that, you start reading people's stories as they post them saying, my drug stopped working. I don't know where to turn. And she couldn't deal with that. She was living with the likelihood that she would die relatively soon. So the first thing I would say is you find your own way of coping. There is no one way to cope emotionally. That first year, we had a lot of twists and turns in that first year. We were sent up, we chased some breadcrumbs. While we had very good oncologists in New York proposing, hey, your cancer, this tumor is susceptible, amenable to a particular kind of new treatment that we think will be really good for you. I looked it up and I discovered good for you meant that instead of dying in 6 to a year, she would more likely die in 8 months to a year and a half. And it would have fewer bad side effects than traditional chemo. That was what he was calling good. And he's a good, caring oncologist. But we, through a friend of a friend, went for a second opinion up at Yale New Haven. I'm in New York City. New Haven is several hours away from here.
Yeah, I'm from Stamford, Connecticut, so I know exactly.
Yeah, nearby. Yale New Haven, great hospital. And they told us about a clinical trial that they were running and invited Lynn. We went for a second opinion, but they invited Lynn into this clinical trial which included the drug she was going to take anyway. And on top of that, a new potentially miracle immunotherapy drug. And we loved the idea. But then they said, if you do it with us, you're going to have to like basically camp out in New Haven for large parts of the next 2 years. And I had a full-time job and we live in New York and just our lives are in New York. So I asked them, can you tell us, is this clinical trial being done at any of those amazing hospitals in New York? And they said, probably, but we can't tell you that. You're on your own for that. And they basically handed me a computer. I mean, I had my phone, but they handed me a full-size computer to do a Google search. I quickly found out that Sloan Kettering in Manhattan had a very similar clinical trial. And so I turned to the nurse practitioner in New Haven and said, can you call your counterpart at Sloan Kettering and see if they have any openings? Because this sounded we were worried there wouldn't be slots for us. And she said, I'm sorry, I wouldn't know who to call. You're on your own for that. And we spent the next few hours making phone calls out of the cafeteria in Yale, New Haven into New York to discover, yes, it was being done at Sloan Kettering, and they needed all of Lynn's medical records, which were at Mount Sinai and her doctor, and we got all of that arranged. So the second thing, the lesson that I draw from that is that American medicine is very siloed, and that these doctors, all of whom I think were good, caring people, had walls around their practices. The ones in New Haven had, for whatever reasons, they were trying to get us to do it in New Haven, and they knew little or nothing about anything outside of the walls of New Haven, and we were on our own. And you have to advocate for yourself a lot more than I ever imagined that you would. That's my lesson number 2. And the book tells multiple stories, including later on when I had almost a yelling match with a nurse at a hospital when they wanted to hold Lynn another day, and she was like, it was late stage. I mean, we wanted her home. And I basically said, we're taking taking her out of here, whether you like it or not, because she's dying of cancer anyway. And you're keeping her here for observation for one more day. And she's like going crazy and starting to get delirium. No, I had to advocate for her big time. So that would be my lesson number 2. And there is a lesson number 3 that I think is really important to share. At the end of the first year, when we had many twists and turns, and I was supporting Lynn hugely. I mean, I had my job, but luckily I had flex hours. I could, and no one that I had to directly manage. It was kind of a project manager job. So I was doing work in the middle of the night. I was doing work in the hospital, in the hospital on my laptop. I had a breakdown, a small breakdown, where I collapsed beside Lynn one day when we came back from a visit that hadn't gone well with a doctor, where it hadn't gone well. And I just started sobbing, saying, I can't do this anymore. First, I had 2 major physical accidents, one riding my bike and one opening the cap of the water reservoir in my car when in fact it was boiling over and severely burned my hand. Oof. Things that just came from being distracted, right, and telling myself, you can do this. I kept saying, you can do this, Tony. You can do this, while riding my bike in the pouring rain, which then led to a huge accident because my brakes were shot. Because you don't ride your bike in thunderstorms and expect it all to come out so well.
I've actually done that, and I know that to be true.
Yeah.
It just doesn't
3 broken
go well.
ribs, evacuated to the nearest trauma center, all of that kind of stuff. Anyway, I had kept it all in, and the only help that I had for myself was writing posts about this experience on caringbridge.org, which is a subplot, and which is in fact how the book ended up coming to exist.
Right. I'm very familiar with
it. I broke down and I sobbed, and I finally told Lynn some of the emotional things that I had been holding in, like my feeling maybe it would be better if she died sooner rather than later, because this is so hard. I mean, this is my beloved wife, and she was nowhere near death in that year, but many physical things went wrong with her. The miracle drug, the immunotherapy, did extend her life by 5 years.
Wow.
So the living with cancer went on for 5 years. Her problems in her back were the gift that kept on giving, the damage to her spine from those tumors. And then they did intensive radiation in her spine to zap the tumors, which also weakened her spine. So she had spinal problems for 5 years. And that's a lot of the in and out of hospitals. But it was very hard. And I had been afraid to tell her these feelings I was having, because she had said, Tony, I'm so happy you're able to support me, but she said repeatedly, "I'm worried that my cancer is going to push you away from me." And I had repeatedly reassured her, "No, I love you. It's not going to." While I was suppressing the hard thoughts, the moments when it was pushing me away, the moments when I thought maybe it would be better if she died sooner rather than later. And when I finally shared this with her, it actually made us closer.
Mm.
She literally, physically pulled me to her and put her forehead against mine and said, "I understand. Really, I do." And then she encouraged me to get a therapist, which for me was huge. And I found a therapist who took my insurance, didn't cost me a fortune, and it was a lifesaver. Other people will have other ways to get help. So my other lesson from living with cancer is it's really hard on the caregiver. And if you don't acknowledge that and take steps to protect yourself as caregiver, you can go down with the person that you're trying to care for, and you can actually fail as a caregiver. I had just pushed myself too far. I couldn't do it.
Yeah. Okay, there's a lot there, a lot that hits home. So I want to say it's 2 episodes, not the last episode, but the episode before us. I had my sister on, and my sister was talking about her journey with her husband and my brother-in-law with pancreatic.
Yes.
And a story that she tells, and then I had it with a friend as well. When they found out about his cancer and they needed to see the doctor, the response was, "Our schedule's booked. We'll see you in 2 weeks."
Yeah.
And my sister was like, "Are you out of your mind? He could die in 2 weeks if he's not seen, you know?" And they didn't care.
Mhm.
And she had to advocate. And she had done a little bit with my dad. Like when my dad went through his cancer journey was a month and a half. From diagnosis to death, it was a month and a half.
Wow.
So we learned a lot about, but this is 2008, so things have changed.
Mhm.
And we've learned as a family, it's not what you know, it's who you know. It's who can connect you, and you never know, which is to me the power of relationships. But I then recently had a lunch with a friend of mine whose husband had kidney cancer,
Mhm.
Kidney or prostate cancer. And he got diagnosed in September, and they said, "We don't have an opening until January."
Whoa.
And so the person on the, like what you're talking about, the person on the other side of the insurance, the person who's in charge of scheduling for the doctor, if they don't know, they don't care. Like it's
Right.
even though they're in the care industry,
Yeah.
they're not going out of their way. They're not like, you have to have an advocate, which my sister, I guess, it needs to be a thing. Like this is a person who knows how to get stuff done. Just as you hire a coach to help you get well mentally, spiritually, when you're faced with these types of things, having an advocate who knows how to get something done is a valuable resource. That's what we've learned.
I think that makes a lot of sense. I wouldn't know how to find a third party, like someone I would pay or hire to do that for me.
But you would agree that it would have been valuable to have one, right?
I would love to have had more guidance. The very first day. So we get this phone call on a Sunday, and from Lynn's GP, whom we've known for years, lovely, lovely man. And he says, "You need to see an oncologist right away." And he recommends a colleague of his who we went to. We call Dr. Dar first thing Monday morning, and their first appointment was Wednesday. Now that's only 2 days.
Right.
But those 2 days were 2 of the longest days in my life. And then in order to deal with her cancer, he says, basically that same day, guess what? We're not even going to think about your lung tumors for a while. We got to stop that tumor in your spine, because if it keeps growing, it's going to paralyze you. So we need to get you to a neurosurgeon ASAP. And we were very unbelievably lucky that a neurosurgeon he referred us to could see us that afternoon if I canceled my whole day and we scurried around trying to get a CD of the images of Lynn's spine, because he needed that. We didn't have that. We had a written report. But then the waiting began. And in our case, it was only a few weeks, but before they could zap the tumor. It's like you have to wait for this, then you have to wait for that. And
Mhm.
we, as uninformed people, we had heard, quote, we need to stop that tumor from growing anymore so it doesn't paralyze you. No one told us what the time scale was that he was talking about. They may not even have known. How do they know how fast it's growing at that moment? They're just seeing
Right.
it in, but we, in those early months, in those early weeks, imagined all of Lynn's tumors, the ones in her lung, growing like crazy, and that these delays were basically going to be like a death sentence. Like by the
Correct.
time we could do it, in fact, it wasn't. In fact, the tumors were still growing in her lungs, at least at a very modest pace. And in fact, of course, we did zap that one in her spine reasonably soon. She did not become paralyzed. There was a danger of paralysis a couple of years later. That's in the book. That's a whole other twist and turn. But emotionally, we could have used someone. One of the reasons I wrote the book was so that you could see, actually, it doesn't move that fast usually. Now, your dad dying in 6 weeks, that's really fast.
Well,
And that means it,
pancreatic back then, by the time you found it, it was
already all over his body. When
Right.
Lynn finally went into hospice, this is part 2 of the book, The Dying with Grace. By the time that we decided to do that, she only lived 2 more weeks. And it was more like that. The cancer was really spreading. But when you've got a few discrete tumors, even though it's stage 4, even though from the beginning they said, we're never going to cure this. We have no cure for this. Unless you get hit by a truck or something, you're going to die from these tumors. The only question is, can we hold them off for a while and give you more good life? And how much life can you have? How much time can you have? And that was the name of the game. With stage 4, but not in the end stage where it's already exploded all over your body, when it's still like, yeah, we're looking at it here, we're looking at it there. It's out of the barn, as the first doctor said. The horse is out of the barn. We can't just like cut these 4 tumors. There are already cancer cells flowing around your system, and eventually they're going to get you. And
Right.
the goal for those years was to learn to live with it. We could really have used a coach to just calm us down and to say, you're not in the end stage at this point. You're not talking about weeks. You're talking about months or years. I know it's horribly difficult waiting for the doctors, waiting for the next appointment, waiting for the results of the biopsy. That was like a checkpoint. We had to get the results of the biopsy before we could do the next thing. And it took an extra week just sitting there waiting for the damn results. And it was emotionally devastating because we didn't know how much or how little it meant. And now I do. Now I would say, chill out. It's only in a few places. There's still time. Lynn ended up with 5 or 6 years. Maybe a miracle drug will come that really gives you more.
Oh. I want to circle back. You said something that I want to dive into next, but I want to circle back on what you said about, we and I spoke about it at the top of the podcast in my own journey, right? I'm going through something, the hardest personal journey of my life. I'm going through literally right now. And it's been going on for a while, and you face adversity, and finally I did, before you came on, I said, if you're the mindset that got you to where you are is not the mindset that gets you to the next place, right? Yeah. And there are things that we need to learn that we don't. And when you're struggling, like you said, the tendency, especially for men, is you could do this. You can muscle through. You're okay. Keep going. Get on the bike. Do this. Go work out. And we do all these things maybe externally, where internally it's a real struggle. And the thing that I've learned, Tony, is I can tell my brain whatever I want to tell it, but if my body isn't catching up to my brain, it hasn't registered yet. You can say all the things that you want. And when I say in your body, it's emotionally, right?
Yes.
Emotionally
the
shows
tension,
up in the body.
The nervousness,
Correct.
the dread, all of that stuff that's going on in there.
Right.
That's when I was getting plenty of exercise. I'm not so much a gym guy as swimming and riding my bike, but I was in good shape and continued to get exercise, rode my bike everywhere instead of taking the subway around here. That doesn't matter. I mean, yes, it's great. Yes, it does matter, because I would have been a basket case if I hadn't kept doing these things to feel good physically, but it didn't make me feel that good. It doesn't on its own overcome the stress and the emotions and the fear.
Right. And those are the things that really have to be dealt with. So when you talked about getting a therapist, I mean, I had to do the same thing. You need a coach, you need a therapist, you need somebody to talk to. Like so often I hear like from people, I don't want to talk to a stranger. Well, you're talking to yourself, and that's not going to work. You've got to talk to, and you've got to talk to someone who's completely objective.
Yes.
Because if it's somebody close, their emotions come in, right? Like you need to talk to someone who's going to really be there objectively to help you. So I love that you said that, because it's so important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I felt that way too. And I should say, the other thing that really worked for me was journaling on CaringBridge. I wouldn't have used the word journaling then. CaringBridge, for those who don't know, is a nonprofit organization with a website that's like a stripped down Facebook. Very simple. You can put up a post, people can make comments. It actually has a lot more on the website, but that's what we were using. Yeah. And you can restrict it to your friends. So this is what Lynn, from the very beginning, had a lot of friends, and she wanted to let them know. So this is a choice we made without even realizing that it was an important choice. It's just who we were. I need to let my friends know. So she starts out writing emails, and soon there's like hundreds of emails flying back and forth. Meanwhile, we're trying to go to the doctor, and we're terrified, and someone told us, look, why don't you do an account on CaringBridge? You can write your updates there, and everyone will read them at their convenience, and they'll put comments underneath as their responses. And so that's what I did. And that was the beginning of what eventually became Carrying the Tiger, was because I started writing these things. I never would have journaled it on my own. Well, putting those notes up there and then getting the responses from our friends turned out to be mind-blowingly good for us on so many levels that I would never have predicted. The love and support that we were getting back was huge. Even when, if you look at it objectively, you would say, oh, well, actually, they're always 90% of the things is like, you go and I'm with you, and that sounds hard, and good luck tomorrow. I mean, it isn't like they were writing amazing treatises and they didn't have to send us a whole email. You know how comments work. They could just put in 4 words and a heart.
Love you.
And we
I love
would
you
look
goes
at that
long
stuff.
way, right? I'm praying.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
After every post, the thing wouldn't auto refresh in those days. It probably does now, but this was 10 years ago. We would keep refreshing the browser. We'd put up a post. It would like notify our friends. It did a push email to our friends. Hey, there's a new post. And within about 15 minutes, some of our friends would put up a heart or a comment or something. And they meant so much to us that we sat there refreshing the browser, because it gave us this strength and the support. Our friends are with us. So I want to throw that into the mix. Yeah, that worked out so great for us. Eventually, I started putting in more about my emotions. So the first few weeks, it's like we went to this doctor and then this and then the New Haven trip and things. It was just a roller coaster we were on. There wasn't a whole lot of room in there to talk about what it felt like to feel fear. And in fact, I think the roller coaster was propelling us. And then eventually we reached the point where Lynn was in treatment and the drugs were starting to hold down her cancer. We didn't yet know that her spine was going to be attacked. That came a little later. And we started to wrestle with what it just feels like to live day by day with a death sentence, and how it was impacting us.
And that was
the future death sentence of unknown date. And I started writing about that. And that became a therapy to me. But before I had my therapist, and it doesn't solve the problem we were just talking about. I couldn't write in there whatever I was thinking about Lynn that I didn't dare tell Lynn, because I was telling everyone, including Lynn, if I wrote it there. So it wouldn't help with what a therapist can help you with. But it hugely helped me with just letting out a lot of my feelings and letting our friends know what was really going on, with the additional side benefit that when Lynn saw her friends in person, because she wasn't bedridden, she was in and out of hospitals, but when out of the hospital, she wasn't bedridden. She was trying to have her life. That's the whole point, is to have more of your life while you can. She didn't have to talk with them about her cancer. The first question wasn't, how are you doing with your cancer? Because she wrote it on CaringBridge, or I wrote it on CaringBridge the night before, and all of her real friends read those things, the people she would see in person. So that was huge too. She could just go through the day almost as if she weren't living with the death sentence hanging over her,
Right.
even while I was writing about what that felt like.
Yeah, that's
Go
huge.
figure.
That's really, really amazing and such great wisdom. So you had mentioned it now twice, and in my notes, I'd love to talk about this. When you're living with a death sentence, right? Like the
Mhm.
doctors say, look, you're not surviving this. The question is the gap between now and when.
Right.
Um, what comes out of that? Because clearly there are choices, right, and how you want to live, and I think that that's such an opportunity for you to share some wisdom on what happens when you know it's going to happen.
Several things happened to us. And again, in the same way that I didn't want to draw universal conclusions from my story, I really feel like I can say what happened to us. And I let the listener decide what their conclusions are that might apply to everyone or to them.
Right.
It brought us hugely closer together. And I don't know that it would for everyone. I can see how this exact same set of stresses could break a couple apart. But in our case, it brought us closer and closer together because we were going through this. I mean, all these analogies I came up with at one point I had in the book about being in a foxhole together because that seemed a good analogy. But then I decided we didn't like the fight analogy. I think people talk about fighting cancer, beating cancer. I think that may be appropriate when you have stage 1, stage 2. You have a shot at actually going into remission that lasts for years. When you start out from day 1 with stage 4 and your doctors unanimously are telling you not to expect it miraculously to go away. There are occasionally stories of lightning striking and some drug miraculously causing full remission in stage 4. I'm not saying it never happens, but it's statistically so unlikely that they the big goal for living with it is to learn to find the beauty, the joy, the grace, the happy moments, the ways to enjoy the days that you have, and just try to ignore it. And I mean, in our case, we went through several years where the tumors were not growing. And the things that happened to Lynn would be like a vertebra collapses in her back, causes huge pain. She needs some kind of procedure. Maybe it has side effects and complications. Some of them worked better. One of them ended up being 4 months of hell. And she almost died of sepsis and things like that. That, of course, is one of the stories in Carrying the Tiger, but that won't happen to everyone. But all through that, we knew the cancer was actually not growing. That if she could make it out of this, it would be just like anyone having a horrible back operation with no cancer in the picture. That if she could make it out of this, we could have more time together. She was a painter. She was painting more ferociously than ever before. It changed the way she made her paintings. She was focusing on what could she get done quickly rather than these bigger, complicated paintings she used to do because it just meant so much. The conversations with her friends, art, music, life, theater. We live in New York. These things are all important to us. We doubled and tripled down on spending time together, going outdoors and seeing the spring happen, having events when we could. Her energy store was limited. Finding those moments. And I would say, it's almost a cliche, when you know your days are limited, even when it's not imminent, you really do appreciate all of those things more. The love, the friendships, the good experiences. And she couldn't do everything she used to do, and she would not travel. We used to travel like crazy. She was unwilling, never wanted to be more than an hour and a half drive from our doctors. That's it. It happened that we routinely rented a place in New Jersey in the summers, and we just kept doing that. It was about an hour and a half away. No more flights everywhere. It's just like, okay. But that's, in a bigger sense, we were narrowing our life down to the things that we could truly enjoy within the constraints that the cancer was imposing.
Right.
Now, I will say also, and I have no idea, I'm not going to go into X-rated stuff, but we had to change the way we had sex. We could no longer have sex the way we used to, both because of the physical pain in her spine and because of changes in her body that the drugs caused. That doesn't mean we stopped having sex, but we had to find a new normal that we could both enjoy together because it's the intimacy that actually, it turns out, it's the intimacy that matters more than any particular act you're doing in order to have physical pleasure. And you can
Sure.
find other things and so we had a lovely sex life. It just wasn't at all like it was before. And I think that that's almost a metaphor for the whole experience.
Wow. Well, I think, when, and I talk about this in my personal, I don't talk about it on a podcast, but
Right.
when adversity hits, there's that period of time where you're comparing your adversity to what had happened before it, right? And you're trying to fit the adversity into your life before it showed up, instead of what you're talking about. No, this is reality, and you have to almost throw the book away because now you're living in a new way.
Yes.
And there's that gap of time between when those two things happen.
Yes.
Right? And can we shrink that down in response time to get to what you're talking about, more living and enjoying and creating memories and moments, which are the things that matter, versus the emotions and the struggle of trying to fit this frickin' thing into what we thought life was going to be, or what life should be, or what life was.
Yes. I think that is the struggle. I think you come to the same exact discussion when you talk about grief and people trying to impose a timeline on grief, which we aren't there yet in this conversation. It would come later, but what we're talking about now sounds very similar to learning to be who you're going to be after your partner has died, after someone close to you has died. And it is very much the struggle of shifting your memories from the things that just make you cry all day long, or whatever your version of it is. I turned out to be a crier. Not everyone is, and I was a little surprised that I was that much of a crier. But the shattering grief, the whatever, it's a long process of learning what is going to be your new normal and accepting it, and reaching a stage where those same memories aren't so devastating because you are able finally to remember the good. For the first time, from what you just said, I realized, I think that first year of our cancer journey, way before Lynn died, kind of corresponds to that pattern, exactly like you said. What's this going to be? How do we learn it? And we're not there. I don't think there are secrets and miracle shortcuts, except knowing that there is a possible future that might work for you, which is what I hope to show in the book in each of these phases, helps you know there's somewhere to try to get to. Like in our case, we did get to a place. But I also write in Carrying the Tiger in a chapter called Scanxiety. That's anxiety with an SC on the front of it, which is a common phrase in the medical world when you're waiting for your next scan. What's it going to show about your tumors? It took us months of these scans to settle in and accept the reality of what the drugs were doing with Lynn's tumors. The first few scans, it's like, well, she's taking this miracle immunotherapy drug. Isn't it going to, maybe it'll make them go away. Maybe she'll get remission. And the tumors did shrink. The first month, they shrank halfway. And we're like, yeah, let's keep going on this, But then 3 months later, we get a scan where one of them has grown a little, and they're similar to before. And then it turned out that over the scans, actually in those days, they were every 6 weeks. She was on intensive scanning her first year. They would hang out and pulse a little bit. If you played the scans like a movie, you would see it's as if the tumors were just sort of pulsing, a little bigger, a little smaller. Well, it took us 9 months to internalize what the doctors were saying from the beginning. They said, with stage 4 cancer, stability in your tumors is a home run, because we have so few ways to keep the tumors from growing. And look, your tumors are not growing. It took us at least 9 months before we were willing to accept that. And it was, oddly enough, it was when some third-party doctor on a podcast that we were watching said exactly what our doctors had been saying to us. We finally believed him. Go figure. Yeah. And it sank in.
So you had, just for the sake of time, you talked about who you are after, right? That you can start to create that while you're going through this. So, let's talk about that.
Sure.
It sounds like there's some things that people can do to prepare, I guess. I don't know. Like what did you mean by that when you brought that up?
I'm actually not sure that there's anything significant that you can do to prepare in the normal sense. I thought I had. I mean, I would start by saying death comes to us all, and a natural death from cancer can be a beautiful thing. And actually, in Lynn's case, it was a really nice death. We were able to, with the help of one of our doctors, because I was trying to pull her back into more treatment, and which is a very common thing. And this, despite the fact that we had always said we're never going to do that. But emotionally, I was like, yeah, let's go back. Maybe one more day of radiation will help. When one of our doctors said, sometimes you have to say enough is enough. And I think this might be that point. And I was able to let go, and Lynn was able to say, yes, let's stop. And so we had several weeks of home hospice that were beautiful. She was able to communicate with me, and I was able to let it happen. I was able to bathe her. I did get AIDS, but at first, not all the day long. And I was increasingly having to treat her like a baby. And it was a beautiful experience for me and for her as she slowly faded away and then died at home. And if you can get to that, if you can let yourself have that, that is actually was hugely good for me, because the grief that followed was not complicated. It was just grief. There was no, I wish we had done this, I wish we had done that. Now, we're not all lucky enough to have our partner die in a way where this is possible. I'm not saying that. But I think it was really helpful that we believed that would be possible. And I'm trying to show in my book how it can be, because if you can have a good death, it does help you later. On the other hand, I really thought, and I even wrote at the time, wow, she's had such a good death. We said goodbye. She gave me permission to love again. All these things that you could just only dream for. Maybe my grief will be shorter or shallower than it would have been. And of course, I can't compare to a would have been, but oh my God. Once it hit, and I think this is true of almost everyone, and I'm taking a grief education course right now to try and understand more about what grief is like for other people. You are in the deep end. You are in an unforgiving sea, bobbing about, grasping at things, unable to get coherently through a day for a while. And for everyone, it's different. For the amount of time that you're in this mode, it is different, but it can be months or a year or more. And I'm not talking about being done with grief. You are never done with grief. You merely are hopefully reaching a place where it's not paralyzing you, and you're able to be back in your life and your job or whatever, and not be constantly spending the whole day actually wishing you were home crying.
Right.
So again, I think the lesson from all of this is to know that it will end, that this bad period you're in, whichever, will change. Everything changes. And that it doesn't have to be a tragedy, and that it won't be in the case of grief, it won't be forever. But don't let your well-meaning friends try and say, like, haven't you finished? Isn't this enough? It's been 6 months. It's been 9 months. If that's what you need, that's what you need. You know?
Yeah. Well, I can tell. I mean, what you're saying is so real for me right now. You could, because of obviously, I mentioned, what I'm walking through, but you hear things like, you just gotta, snap out of it, or you hear things like you can't let that control you, or what the mind can conceive and believe it can achieve, and you hear all these things, and that's why I say, great, that all theoretically is true. But grief is emotional. And until your body catches up to your brain, you're just in it for a while. And
I would offer you another phrase that I picked up from David Kessler, who's grief.com, great expert on this. It's his course that I'm taking. You can't heal what you don't feel. If you don't let yourself feel it, you will not heal it. And I recently, Anderson Cooper, does a very famous podcast about grief. And I recently listened to one of his episodes, and he talked about how it took him 20 years to his younger brother. I don't actually, I'll get the details wrong. I believe it was his younger brother, but a sibling of his died many years ago. And he manned up and powered through it. And only now, when he's dealing with the death of his mother, which inspired this podcast and talking to experts, did he realize that actually that screwed up his life for 20 years, that he didn't let himself grieve properly back then.
I talk about that a lot. When my dad died, I manned up, poured myself into my business, shut my emotions off, and it took me 10 years.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It's not good.
You have to let yourself feel it. And then then of course comes the problem. I was really lucky. I was 65 when Lynn died. I quit my job. I just did. I hadn't intended to quit for another 5 years, but I had enough savings and it wasn't even a rational thought. Like, no, I didn't have the savings I wanted to have, but I couldn't do both. And of course, most people aren't that lucky, like you, like me earlier in my life when I was being a caregiver. I couldn't quit my job. Most people have to try and find the balance. And all power to you, but for goodness sake, don't think that you can just think your way out of this, because grief is intense and it will live in there. And if you don't let yourself feel it and let it control you for a while, it will control you for a lot longer in more subtle ways that you aren't even aware of.
Tony, thank you for sharing that. That's probably some of the, I mean, that's just so important. You know, there's a lot of things that we have talked about that I think are very important. But, you know, death comes in many forms, not just physical death. There's relational death, there's spiritual death, there's all kinds of things. And we, I think, spend so much time in this world of shallowness, if you will, in regards to, right, like what you see on a screen or what you see on your phone or all these gurus telling you all these things. But at the end, you know, we are human beings and we're built a certain way. And the things like you're talking about, you have to go through this process of healing to get to that other place where there's life on the other side of that. And, and, you know, the one thing I've gotten very present to is, you know, when you go through those things and like you're talking about, the person who comes out on the other side has never been manifested before. This is a new person.
Absolutely.
And that is actually quite exciting.
Yes.
To know, like, hey, you know, I'm sure the Tony today is not the same one, you know, that went through all those things.
It is totally true. And I would say even like, so I write Carrying the Tiger. I mean, Lynn died. I spent a year writing Carrying the Tiger, and I wrote it in particular to help people, but not expecting that I would be able to go on multiple podcasts now and talk about it. And I wasn't looking forward to going on these podcasts. I thought, oh, no, that's going to be hard. That's marketing. That's sales. I don't like sales. I've always been behind the scenes guy. Guess what? This is feeding me. I end up signing up for this course to become a grief educator because I realized that this has given me a purpose and that I love having conversations like this and helping people benefit from what I went through and what Lynn went through. You know?
Yeah,
and
I love it.
I was never that person.
I love that. I really do. So I got one final question for you, but before we do, before I ask it, people can find your book how?
It's Carrying the Tiger by Tony Stewart. My website is TonyStewartAuthor.com. It is available everywhere in print, ebook, and audio. You can go to Amazon and search for it, or you can go to Tony Stewart Author and click the buy the book, and I have a page with like links to Amazon and Barnes and Nobles and a million other places, Spotify and such and Audible for the audio, and you can just pick and go straight to it there. Either way, Carrying.
You said Tony Stewart, Tony Stewart Author.com.
Yes, TonyStewartAuthor.com. I have a lot of information there. You can read a sample. You can hear the audible sample. Yes, TonyStewartAuthor.com. Or just go on Amazon or wherever and search for Carrying the Tiger. It'll come right up.
So before we wrap up, I have to ask the title. I'm sure you've been asked this many times. Why Carrying the Tiger as the title?
So there was a glitch in the audio for a moment there. I hope it worked out. Carrying the Tiger came from an email that a friend sent to Lynn 3 or 4 weeks in, right near the beginning. And she said in the email, in our Tai Chi group, we carry a tiger for someone who is going through difficult circumstances and facing a difficult challenge. The 3 motions of bending low, picking up the tiger, and putting it on a hilltop far away make that tiger so much less threatening, because now it is far away from you on a hilltop. And Lynn wrote back to her friend, "Thank you so much. Please carry tigers for me. And also, could you teach me how to carry a tiger?"
Wow.
Yeah.
That's deep, man.
It is deep.
It's just, that is,
It is
I didn't
deep.
expect that kind of answer. That's good. Wow. Wow.
And so when I was doing the book, that anecdote was in the book for a long time before I realized, what a great title. But by then I had the subtitle with the 3 parts, and I realized that each of those, living with cancer, dying with grace, finding joy while grieving, is its own challenge, and was its own challenge for us and then for me. And for each of those, I needed to learn how to carry the tiger.
Wow. Well, you've been awesome. Thank you so much. I wish you such, I hope the book gets out there. People read it. I will. I have a copy of it now. So I'm excited to hear more about your journey, and really thank you for being here today.
Well, you're welcome. This was really good.
Awesome.